Good evening, and welcome to a special edition of STARCAST. From Planet Waves, I'm Eric Francis, your astrologer, here with a focused commentary on one topic in response to a number of questions I've received from customers of somewhere in between the 2024 annual reading. I'm working on the 31st of January, 2023. It's a little before 7 o'clock, and I am at the Astrology Chalet, fire going. I'm here 2 more nights, and then I will be back in Kingston, having done quite a bit here and learned quite a bit here. This is the location where I did all of the videos for Somewhere in Between, which is my version of annual readings for 2024. Now, one thing about those readings is you are not seeing other people doing anything like this. If you do know of something, for example, a comprehensive reading done by sun sign and rising sign that has some substance to it and some length and comes with a multimedia presentation, or really any year ahead, let me know. I'm very curious to know about it, because so far as I understand, and I don't know everything obviously, and I'm not really that keen on following astrology websites, there is nothing else like this. Now, the questions all involve, and I've gotten several of them, and usually I get none of them. So that's why I am responding. The questions all involve, okay, this is a reading of my solar chart, and maybe for my rising sign, how does this relate to my proper natal chart? And that's a good question. And the answer, depending on how you look at it, is either very simple or very complicated. The simple answer is it's a reading, and it doesn't really matter how I did it. I leave enough astrology in both the written and the audio. Well, now we converted to video, fortunately, much more fun for that kind of a long reading. And I include my rationales astrologically. I describe my reading. In other words, it's an open reading. It's not one of these things that the information is somehow cryptic, or I don't give any references, kind of like a palm reading or a tea leaf reading. And I give the information for a number of reasons. One is I think it's relevant to leave some of it in, and then I leave it in for people who are astrologers or astrology students, and I reckon there's a good few of them. I hear from you, so that you know how I'm working. I leave my notes in the margin so that you can follow along with what I'm doing. And I try to do this in such a way that does not obstruct the reading. This is a very careful balance, because when people read things that they don't understand, usually their first response is to feel stupid. And so I have to be nuanced in how I explain the astrology, and to do so in a way that is engaging rather than repelling. This is not easy to do this. And astrology is very, very complicated. I'm amazed anyone has the patience to learn it here in the now entering the mid-21st century, because of the amount of study and practice that it takes. It was one of the good decisions I made fairly young in life, was to, attempt to learn this mostly out of curiosity. And the thing that got me into astrology was the Patrick Walker horoscope in the New York Post. And that was the first kind of device that I learned. And I figured out, I knew enough I had little bits and bobs of astrology, nothing that I could really work with, but I had enough to get started basically reverse engineering the New York Post horoscope. This is around 1994. And I had been reading it for a few years, and it was just so good. And after a couple of years of reading it, I thought, I have got to figure out how he's doing this. It was, first of all, Patrick wrote with warmth and genuine respect and a kind of British wit and charm, and came up with just masterful turns of phrase, and described things in ways that were useful. And he always left a little astrology in the column. And it's 50 words a day, right? Just 50 words. That's like basically 2 long sentences or 3 short sentences. But there was enough astrology in there that I learned the method that he was using. And that method is called the solar house method. And it is a highly simplified astrology that uses the sun as a reference point, because most people don't know their ascendant. Many people don't know they even have one. It's just another word. And they don't know their moon sign. And besides which, the column is appearing in a public newspaper where anyone can just pick the thing up, and it has to be simple. If you're going to leave the thing open on the counter at the beauty parlor, and all day long the ladies are going to come through and read their Patrick Walker horoscope, the astrology can't be complicated and the messages cannot be complicated. If you only have 50 words, you got to get right to the point and get out. But you have to know what you're doing. And the simplification of the astrology would seem impossible if astrology, as we think of it, is based on the date and time of birth, and place of birth, which gives an absolutely unique chart, because there's never, unless they're twins, born at the same place and the same time. And even twins are born 5 minutes apart or 10 minutes apart. So it completely forgoes that entire level of astrology, the date and place and time, and all the placements of the planets at birth. Instead, what solar house astrology does, sun sign astrology, as it's called, is it starts with a blank wheel, and it puts in the planets where they are in the sky on that day, and then it's read like a tarot card reading. So sun sign astrology is much closer to a tarot card reading than it is to an astrology reading, except that it uses the 12 houses, the 12 signs of the astrological wheel, and it uses the planets in the locations that they are using an official scientific ephemeris. And then the sun sign astrologer reads this. It reads only transits, mutual aspects, meaning things that are happening, planets, Venus square Mars in the sky right now, that are happening now. It cannot tell where any planet is except your sun, and if people are reading for their rising sign, their rising sign. So it is entirely based on the house placements, sign and house placements of planets moving around in the real sky that you could look out at night and see Venus or Jupiter right there. Sun sign astrology. Here's the thing about sun sign astrology. I'm the only person I know who writes about it. I'm the only person I know who dares to explain what this is or how it is done. And in fact, I have been at astrology conferences. I was once at UAC on a panel of sun sign writers who, some of them said they didn't really believe in it. I once saw Chani Nicholas on a thing on Netflix say, well, it can't be that accurate. I mean, how do you write for Aries when 50,000 people are going to read Aries? But this is the difference. It works if you know what you're doing. But it's not written about in astrology textbooks. So far as I know, it's not taught in astrology programs. it is basically an occult level of astrology. And part of why it's occult is that astrologers are going on and on about having the birth time accurate, which is important when you are reading the birth chart. And then you may have to do weeks of work. I'm working with a client in Canada where I'm going to work with her for as many weeks as it takes to get a good chart for her so that she has something to work with. And most astrologers don't want to say that you can just leave that all behind and do something else. Now, I came into astrology first as a rune reader. I bought a set of runes by Ralph Blum. It was so incredible. So incredible. The way these little 3-stone spread, holy Moses, it was just perfect. Then I learned tarot cards, and I have read tarot cards now going on 40 years. So before I knew astrology, I had the concept of divination. I understood what divination was. It is allowing in something completely random and then finding that it makes sense. And I've tried all kinds of divination. I've used gaming dice and playing cards, and basically I can read anything. So when it comes to using the solar chart, well, it's easy for me to work with it as divination, but it's also astrology. So, for example, how do I put into context the solar eclipse in Aries for all 12 signs? I've got to understand what that means because it's happening in Aries. It's in the first house for Aries. It's in the second house for Pisces. It's in the third house for Aquarius, et cetera, et cetera. I've got to have something interesting to say about that. And it seems to work. People are very happy with these readings. People have been reading my horoscope column for 30 years. And part of that is the astrology. Part of that is that I am fairly good at reading charts, but I am even better at explaining and interpreting. This is the thing, is making it accessible. I'm sure there are much more skilled readers than I am, but what good is that if they can't get the idea out of the water and onto dry land and explain to you what that really means? So on one level, there really is no relationship between the sun sign chart reading and your natal chart reading. But for some reason, you will experience parallels in the message that you might get from both, or you just simply can relate to the solar chart reading. And the questions I'm getting all involve like, yeah, I want to make this relevant to my natal chart. How do I do this? Well, one way is that you really don't. The other way is, if you want to make it relative to your natal chart, read for your rising sign. You've got to find out your rising sign. It's not that hard. All you need is your birth time and place. And then you can go to astro.com, you can cast it, and you will find out what your rising sign is. And the rising sign will provide you with approximate transits based on my reading that will loosely fit your chart. Now, I use the term whole sign houses, and again, here we get into very complex and potentially controversial territory. But the way that I'm reading sun sign astrology is that normally the houses intersect the signs in the middle of the house. There's two wheels turning, but we don't have that so much in sun sign astrology. But what we do have is, for example, with Aries, Taurus is the second house, Gemini is the third house. For Pisces, Aries is the second house, and Taurus is the third house. So the way that I describe it in the readings, if you listen carefully to what I'm saying, because I do choose my words carefully, the solar chart is the chart for the entire sign and not the person. But that works pretty good. You can think, well, 1/12 of the population. Yeah, nobody gives a toss about 1/12 of the population. You're lucky if society generally works in binary or these days non-binary, making things even more kind of simplistic and mushy. There's very little that you can do, even clothing sizes. There's not 12 sizes of t-shirts. There's hardly 12 of anything. And so even though the solar chart is the chart for the sign and not the person, there can be some very specific information in there, and it depends on the ability of the astrologer to read the chart, and then it depends on the ability of that same astrologer to express what is observed in words. Okay, so whole sign houses, all that means is that I am counting the end of the sign as the end of the house. And I do this for the most part in all of my readings. Now, you're probably not up to your ears in the classical astrology community and all that stuff, where they have a big sign up at the top of the website that if you don't use whole sign houses, you're not welcome here. I'm not a religious advocate of whole sign houses, and I can use any house system I need or want to use, including heliocentric astrology and sidereal astrology and all of that. The key with divination is that the diviner be sincere. It's much less about the technical aspects. It's kind of like listening to a song, and that's how I suggest that you work with my sun sign readings, is just take them as a unique piece of creative expression and see if you can relate to it. And if you are one of those people who is very curious about what the fuck is going on, that's a good reason to start studying astrology. And I have lots of material that can help you do that. But let's take an example of one person who wrote to me, and I think there was something like Taurus rising, but their sun was in Scorpio, or vice versa, and maybe they had their moon in Leo. Well, first of all of those things are on the fixed cross. They're fixed signs. And so in working with any sign, I'm almost always working with the opposite sign. I mean, every one of the somewhere in between readings includes a reading of the opposite sign, also known as the relationship house, because that's the house that describes the other, right? Self, first house, other, seventh house. And so I'm doing a lot of integrating those pairs of opposites. How do you integrate self and other? And I work with the cross quite a bit. The entire, if you're, for example, if you're a Pisces, and you can see this in the work that I'm doing, I'm paying a lot of attention to the mutable cross. So, for example, when I read for Pisces, I'm going to pay special attention to Gemini, Virgo, and Sagittarius also. And if you're reading carefully, you can see this approach in the reading. It's not haphazard. I am being very conscious and careful how I do this, and I always tell you what house I'm talking about and why I'm talking about it. So if you are reading this and you're enticed by it in some way, and you're curious, and your mind wants to open up, wants to absorb more, be gentle. Take that as an invitation. And perhaps follow it. The thing with astrology is you must be very, very patient. There are so many different concepts to learn that in our time, it's almost impossible. And then once you know all the concepts, or you never know all of them, but you know a few of them, then you have to start putting them together into the form of a reading. Now, one of the reasons why I get so much out of my solar charts. Hold on, I'm going to just open the window. It's getting very warm in here. It's amazing what a little gas stove, a little gas fireplace can do. One of the reasons why I get so much out of the solar chart, even though I don't have your natal chart to work with, is because I'm able to read an entire aspect pattern. an example of the entire aspect pattern is, all right, let me take a look at the Aquarius new moon chart. So, for example, in the Aquarius new moon chart, let's go to the new moon itself. I'm looking at, for example, this new moon takes place in an aspect to, it's at 21 degrees Aquarius, and that means it's resonating with all that is at 21 degrees approximately of every sign. That brings in Chiron at 16, the North Node at 17, and Eris at 24, all in Aries. And the thing is trine Vesta, and it is also, it's trine Vesta, and then that's square Juno, etc., etc. I'm able to take that whole thing and tell a story about it that you can relate to. So this is the thing that astrology books don't do. They'll say, if the sun is in Aries, that's what that means. If Venus is in Aries, that's what that means. But that's not reading the chart. When you're reading the chart, you're handed a chart with the sun and Venus in Aries, and then maybe Saturn is in Libra, and then the moon is splitting the difference in Cancer. And so you've got this T-square. You've got three legs of the thing activated, and you don't just read one tarot card at a time in a tarot reading. The art of reading tarot is that the cards are kind of playing off one another. Which two cards are next to each other? Do they face in or do they face out? This is reading. And so while I am in many ways working with much less information, particularly not working with your natal chart, I am able to do a very thorough reading of the information that is in front of me. And because I work with many planets, I have a lot of extra information. I'm easily tracking. If I took a blank wheel right now, I could write out a chart without looking that would have 30, 35 planets in it, just from memory. I wouldn't have the exact degrees and positions, but I can tell you Sila Nunum is in Leo, and Mors Sumnus is in Taurus, and Sednus changing signs from Taurus to Gemini, and so on and so on and so on. That's a lot of information. So the way that I would suggest this is, and I've said this a minute ago, and I keep kind of coming back to tarot cards, is to view my readings as an astrological tarot reading, but the tarot cards are the actual planets. And if you are reading for your sun and your rising sign, both, right? I suggest this. Most sun sign astrology doesn't take the rising sign into account because most people don't know their rising sign. But let's pretend you're reading for your rising sign also. And let's pretend that they're opposite signs. There is not likely to be a conflict between the two readings. You may have some difficulty figuring out how I got to my observations and my conclusions, but there is very unlikely to be an actual conflict between the things that I'm saying, because I am already taking into account the entire cross, i.e. the entire fixed cross. And so I'm working with that as one whole unit, but it's the context that changes based on the change in the reference sign, whatever your reference is, sun, moon, rising, Chiron, whatever the reference is. If you're sincere, you're going to get usable information from it. So there's a number of other different types of scenarios. I mean, for example, I am born with the sun in Pisces. I have Cancer in the ascendant. Okay, so at least they're both water signs. And when you have a water sign, the next sign is always going to be a fire sign. But I have done so much sun sign astrology that I think of my solar chart as my chart in some sense of it, right? So I'm perfectly happy to think of myself, just forget the rising sign, scratch that, just go for Pisces and count the signs around, and the 10th place from Pisces is going to be Gemini. No, it's going to be Sagittarius. And I'm perfectly happy being a Pisces with Sagittarius on the 10th house. It works perfectly fine for me. I'm a fucking astrologer and an internationally famous investigative reporter. How much more Sagittarian can you get? So one of the things you can do is get to know your solar chart, even though it's not your natal chart. Just get to know your solar chart. Understand, I have so much solar chart material written in all the past annuals, but I'm putting more and more in every year that I'm basically developing a sun sign solar chart book based on my explanations of the solar chart in the annual editions. So just read more carefully and print. I make them printable. They are not in WordPress format. The reason I make them printable is I'm trying to get you to print them and then find one of those old things previously known as a pencil or a highlighter and take over the freaking thing and learn your solar chart. It's not going to affect your reading of your natal chart. Your natal chart is a different thing, and one of the beautiful parallels in astrology is when the various versions of your chart tell the same story. They tell a similar or parallel story. And there's no need to perseverate over this. There's no need to split hairs. It's like, okay, keep things in their context. If you're reading for your rising sign, read for your rising sign, and that's your context. And what I am saying, apart from any technicalities, is usually so rich and replete with information and context that I could leave all the astrology out. But it is astrology, and I know that some people are really curious about astrology, so I want to make sure you have enough without turning off the people who are not that interested and they just want the message. Trust me, this is not easy to do this, and I am very happy that I was a journalist for 10, 12 years at least before I came to writing about astrology, because one of the things you have to learn how to do in journalism is to write in context for people who have never heard of the subject before. Journalism is expository writing. There should be nothing cryptic in journalism. There should be no mystery. There's strict rules for how you introduce someone on the first reference. You introduce someone and their job, and you basically say their significance in the story the first time you mention them in the story. And journalism has dozens and dozens of conventions like that make it comprehensibly journalism. Now, this is going down the drain with all this blogging and substacking and tweeting and social media, but the good bloggers and the good substackers still know how to write a first reference. They still know how to introduce a source. They still know how to quote a document, and that's the difference between good journalism and bad journalism on a structured level. Regardless of the viewpoint of the writer, they are at least introducing their topics in a predictable and in a structured way, and I am deeply devoted to doing this in astrology. Okay, so that is what I have to say. I could go on about this for a long time. I'm one of the only people in the world who would ever teach a sun sign writing seminar, and for as advanced of an astrologer as I am, and I mean I can work with easily 120 planets and a number of deep space points, and I can do many different forms of progression, though I prefer ordinary secondary progressions. And I've read thousands and thousands of event charts and so on and so on. What got me into it was, imagine me sitting in my girlfriend Hillary's bed, and she'd go to her mom's bedroom and steal some weed off of her mom's tray, and she'd roll a joint. And after the end of a long day of writing about dioxin and PCBs and corporate environmental fraud and lawsuits, Hillary would light a joint, and then I would just sit there in a slightly more relaxed and open state. And I had an ephemeris, the Rosicrucian ephemeris. I still have my copy that I got on my birthday in 1994, and a deck of Aleister Crowley tarot cards, which contain references to astrology. They're really handy for that. I don't like to read the Crowley tarot, but it's a great deck to study. And I would sit there with a pencil and a notebook and figure out, and the ephemeris, and figure out why Patrick said the things that he said that day based on the little clues he gave. With Venus crossing your dynamic 10th house, you'll be seeking some new form of success. But remember, though life is not a popularity contest, it really does matter that you have some popularity, or you'll attract more bees with honey or something like this, right? Venus is highlighted. Where is Venus? Venus is in that house. So I just started to pick up the basic syntax of how you say, that planet changed signs, or that planet's making an aspect to that planet, and here's what I have to say to you about that. Only what I'm doing is I'm taking a form that is generally expressed in 50 words per sign, i.e. the New York Post horoscope, which I still, if I miss it, it's a rare day. I am on that. I'm on the Sally Brompton New York Post horoscope. I was friends with her for many years. I love her. She's very funny and a fantastic mundane astrologer. She's just so good. She's a Brit. Patrick Walker taught her to read astrology charts. She visited Patrick in Lindos on Rhodes, where I must go to the Acropolis at Rhodes. I will go there soon, probably this year. If you'd like to come with me, write to me and tell me. And Patrick, she's staying in Patrick's little villa in Lindos. And he says, okay, now I want you to go up to the Acropolis. It's not like the one in Athens, but still, it's an Acropolis with a sports stadium, and commune with the gods. This is a man after my own heart. Well, of course you commune with the gods. What do they have to say? We need to listen. And that's what I'm doing. It's one step away from channeling. The thing that makes it different from channeling is I can explain exactly why I said something to another astrologer. Channeling, you can't really do that. It's just coming through you. You don't really know. There's not very much structure. Maybe you can go back to the entity and say, but why did you tell me to say that? Okay, fine. But with astrology, it's like, okay, if I'm saying that this is going to be an interesting year for Capricorn, for money, what I'm saying is that Pluto has entered Aquarius, your second house. That's got a lot to do with money, and there's going to be all kinds of activity in your second house. Okay, so I'm going on. I will stop. I'm very interested in teaching this. Can you tell I get excited? And it would be really fun to have some astrology students and to get a thing going. And a perfect place to start is the sun sign column. After all, it is simplified, but no less elegant, no less beautiful. I'll end with this story. Jonathan Cainer once wrote in his column that he feels like he's playing a toy piano when he very well-trained astrologer. Jonathan Cainer was really using a set of 9 planets and 12 houses and 12 signs. He was exceptionally well-trained, but also a great writer. You have to be a great writer to be a great astrologer. But he said, I'm playing a toy piano. And I saw that, and I wrote right back to him, because I worked for him. We corresponded frequently. I said, Jonathan, no, you're not playing a toy piano. You're playing a grand piano, but you're playing a very sweet and simple song. And that is sun sign astrology. I just take that to the max, and I'm able to go on in some detail, and so could he. All right, that is what I have to say to you. Please enter any comments in the comment section of this Substack, or otherwise, if you're not reading this or hearing this by way of Substack, just reply to the email. Get my attention. It's easy. But I encourage Planet Waves readers to get a Substack account and talk to me on Substack. I am always there. It's easy to get my attention. If you write me a question, I'm going to answer the question because that's my nature. All right, lots of love to you. Signing off from the Astrology Chalet in Rosendale, New York, Ulster County, on a chilly winter night. Lots of love, and bye for now.